All right, in these videos, we're going to look at a graph of a function and answer a lot of questions about the function. And I like to give specific examples for this rather than just going through a whole bunch of definitions. So you will see how each of the words and the definitions work in action. I think that's easier to understand in concrete examples. So I'm going to go through one example in this video, and then I have two more examples, and I'll go through the same kind of information if you need more practice with this kind of thing. All right, so looking at this example, again, this is just a picture from your textbook. So it is from section 3.3, so you can look at that on your e-textbook, or you can just kind of sketch down this information if you want to. So this here is a function. Notice that it would pass the vertical line test if I drew vertical lines through it. Okay, the first thing that they're asking is, what are f of -5, f of 0, and f of 3? So in other words, they're making sure you understand function notation, right? So f of -5 means when x is -5, what is y? Okay, f of x is function notation, so the x is the number that's in the parentheses there. All right, so -5, when you go to x equals -5 on the graph, you see that you have a point there, -5, 8. Okay, so y is 8. Another way to say that point is, of course, -5, 8, and but this is the function notation of it. All right, the f of 0 means x equals 0. So go and you see there's a point given there at 0, -4. So the f of 0 is equal to -4. F of 3, we go to x equals 3. There it is, 3, 4. So f of 3 equals 4. Again, these could be written as the points 0, -4. and 3, 4. So this is just testing you on understanding function notation. All right, B, the domain. Domain means all the x values. All the x values of a graph or equation. So notice that x values are going to go from left to right. And this graph is continuous. It's connected through all these points. So please do not list all these points. The x values, that is not correct because it's all the points in between as well. So you need to use interval notation. Okay, which means you're going to start at this first x value over on the left. That's -7. And then you're going to end at the last x value, which is 3. Okay, and then you, since this point is included, there's a solid dot there, you're going to use a bracket. And this point is also included, so you're going to use a bracket there. If the points were just open circles, that's when you use that parenthesis instead of a bracket. All right, C, the range. Range is all the y values. Okay, you're also still going to use interval notation. And in the y values, y is obviously vertical. So you want to start at the bottom of the graph and go and find out what's the highest y value. So notice you want to go from lowest to highest. So the lowest y value is here and here. It's at -8. So start the interval at -8. And then, yeah, it has a bunch of y values throughout here. It doesn't really end at 4 because the y's, it keeps going continuously up to 8. So 8 is the highest point, and we're going to use a bracket and a bracket because we have filled in dots there. All right. Letter D says list all the intercepts. Recall that these are the points where it touches the graph. Now we're just going to write x equals for our x-intercepts. That's a good way to write it. And y equals for our y-intercepts. Sorry, I think I'm running off the page here. Let's see if you can see a little bit more there. All right, so our x-intercepts are where we have y equals 0. So there are 3 of them. and it's where we cross the x-axis. So that would be x equals -6, -2, and 2. Our y-intercept is where we cross the y-axis, and that's where x equals 0. And so that is at -4. All right. Okay, let's answer letter E. So it says, how many times does the line y equals 2 intersect the graph? I'm going to answer that right up here, so I have some space. All right, so the line y equals 2. Let's add that. It's not a line on the graph right now, but they're saying let's add that to the graph, okay, and see how many times it intersects. So y equals 2 would be a horizontal line at 2. If you look at the graph here, it looks like it's 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. Yeah, it's going by 2s. This point is at 4, which also makes sense. Okay, so the actual y equals 2 would be right here. Always watch out for the scale of the graph. So this is the line y equals 2. So you can see that it intersects the graph right here. 1, 2, and 3. So 3 times does it intersect the graph. All right, letter F. I think I can fit that right in here. What values of x does f of x equal -8? Okay, in other words, f of x, sometimes you just need to talk to yourself and rewrite. That's y equals -8 because it's f of x. It's not x, right? The x would be right there. So where does the graph y equals -8? Well, let's throw that onto the graph. Y equals -8 is right here. I can tell from those values. Okay, for what values of x? So notice it hits 2 times, right? But that's, whoops, not what they're asking right now. They're saying for what values of x? So x is, or y is -8 when x is -7. And x is, or y is -8 when x is 1. So for those 2 values. All right. Final one, let's look here at G. This one always gives people trouble, so I always want you to kind of read it out to yourself and then kind of reword it for yourself. So it says, for what values of x? Okay, so first of all, notice that you're going to answer values of x, and you're going to answer that in an interval. Okay, is f of x greater than 0? Okay, so in other words, y is greater than 0. Okay, the graph is above the x-axis. Okay, y is positive. You want to kind of say those things to yourself to figure out what it's asking, because when you figure out what it's asking, it's actually not a hard question. It's just hard to understand what it's asking. So what I've done is I've highlighted, hey, this part of the graph, right, the y is greater than 0, and this part of the graph, the y is greater than 0. It's not asking where the x is greater than 0. It never would. Okay, it's asking where the y is greater than 0, so just above the x-axis. So we're starting there at -6, and we're going to -2. Notice it just says greater than 0. So we're going to use a parenthesis because we don't want to include where -6, 0 is. We don't want to include the point. So a parenthesis and a parenthesis. And then it looks like there's that second part. Where is it greater than 0? Well, it's above the x-axis, again, starting at 2, using a parenthesis because I don't want to include that 2 where it equals 0, and ending at 3. Okay, and here's that little tricky part. This is going to be a bracket because notice at 3, 4, y is still greater than 0. So we do want to include that part. We just don't want to include where it actually equals 0. Okay, so make yourself a note down here. This is the x intervals. Okay, y is greater than 0, sure. Where does it occur? It's in the x